Hey everyone, Anarch here. This is another installment in the series that I call Anarch Abridged, which is, just one of these short sit and talk to the camera videos where I just kind of riff on an idea or a thought I've been having. The main thing that I do on this channel are these big video essays, and one of those is still in production. But the topic of this particular Anarch Abridged is the topic of cooperation. So I think we're all sort of familiar with what I mean by this word cooperation. And I've chosen the topic very obviously because we are so close to the Christmas season. Here I am, it's freezing outside, and honestly, it's pretty cold inside too, that I'm wearing this sweater even after I've got the house kind of heated up. But I want to talk about the importance of cooperation, not only to, revolutionary ideology or radical leftism, but also to just how it's important to us as a species. So first, I want to kind of address this idea that I think all of us have, that these principles of cooperation and competition sort of stand in opposition to one another. And, I think that's generally correct. Maybe I'll offer a little bit of nuance here, but what I'd really like to note up front is that what radical leftists oppose more than anything is coercion into either of these. The idea that you would be dependent on a system that forced you to function under any regime of functioning. It's just that capitalism forces us to compete. So once again, it's not bad. Competition isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's something we can opt into, if it's something we can choose. But under capitalism, we don't get to choose. We are forced to compete with one another. We create artificial scarcity, and we create an artificial system of competition, wherein perhaps there might be competition within nature out of necessity. We are not competing out of necessity. We are competing because it is useful for capitalism that we compete. So by contrast, radical leftists tend toward this ethos of cooperation. And this is not only because cooperation is the negation of capitalism, but because it's based in an idea that the social whole, when united together, acting in concert with one another, is much, much more powerful than the sum of its pieces. A bunch of atomized individuals all simply acting for their own personal self-interest. And here's the interesting thing. This is not just a wild hypothesis. Now, perhaps it was something that could have been, justified in principle and philosophical abstraction back in the time that it was originally being made as an argument. And once again, perhaps it could have been just simply understood as the opposite or the negating impulse to capitalism. But one thing that I mentioned in part 2 of A Modern Anarchism is that this is actually the conclusion of complex systems analysis as well. Systems that demonstrate emergence, that function as more than the sum of their parts, are systems which encourage cooperation. Competition tends to be good for sort of weeding out better and worst models, but cooperation is what makes systems demonstrate emergent qualities. And this is because cooperation is what allows information to distribute openly between the agents within the system. It allows information to flow because when we cooperate, we don't act from a place of distrust. And I think that's a big part of what's going on here. I plan to eventually write a much more extensive essay on the topics of trust and secrecy, but I think what you'll see is that's something that's really, really central to the conversation at hand about the cooperation and competition. So when you're competing with another person, you don't want to tell them too much. If you trust them, if you trust them too much, you're going to distribute sensitive information which they could use to harm you within a competitive process. Whereas when you're cooperating, the more information that you distribute, the better all of you are going to act together. You're essentially trying to unite your efforts in one direction. And by doing so, you all, it adds up to 20, 30, 1,000 million people, as opposed to everybody, aiming in a bunch of random directions. So you want to distribute lots of information. And that means that this relation kind of goes the opposite direction as well. If you want to create a society where people are going to cooperate, you need to increase trust. You need to get people to be willing to trade information, to distribute information among one another. You need to have people not see each other as inherent enemies. Because if they treat each other as inherent enemies, then, once again, as these relations go backwards, this is going to encourage a society of atomization, distrust, and therefore competition. So, I want to also relate this to the concept of, expectation of return, expectation of equal trade, the concept of gift giving, right? This is partially why I chose this topic for this Anarcha Bridge, right? This is the last one. This one's going to come out right before Christmas, okay? So when you go really far back, what you find is that high degrees of cooperation and in-group trust, what it leads to is essentially gift economies. And by gift economy, what I mean is an economy wherein distribution is based on what people need and what people want, rather than equal remuneration or an equal trade. And I know that, living under capitalism, that must sound like something is probably wrong. That might seem like that's bad. You're getting one over on the other guy, and or he's getting one over on you, and if it's not equal, it seems kind of like unjust, like somebody's being exploited or manipulated in the process. But here's the thing: that is a mentality that is based on the fact that you're not going to see that person again. You distrust that they are trying to pull one over on you, so it essentially boils down to this idea that there is not going to be a continued relationship between you. So David Graeber talks about this in Debt. The idea is that, when you do these lopsided trades, there was almost like a consciousness to this fact. Like, I gave you, something that was more valuable in exchange than you gave me, perhaps, or vice versa, right? But when this was being done, it was done with the understanding that we were never going to balance the books completely, that I was going to see you again. And that perhaps if I paid in too much, or I gave you something that was too much worth, you were going to return the favor at a later date, and perhaps vice versa. So what this meant was that not equal trade or unequal trade was a recognition of a long-term relationship. And so once again, what's happened is we've returned to the concept of trust, right? When you trust people, you recognize they're not trying to screw you over, that probably if there's some lopsidedness or some unevenness, it's incidental, or it is the statement, a sort of unspoken statement of a long-term commitment to the relationship between the two of you, and that they will have opportunities to balance those books in that sense as time goes on. And so David Graeber talks about how in these cultures that have this sort of implicit understanding, if it wasn't kind of lopsided in a sense, it was almost like an insult. It was like, I don't plan on having a long-term relationship with you. I don't trust you. I need to make sure that we are square now, because otherwise, I will have come out on the wrong side of this, and I want to make sure that we're both equal now. Things are covered. Things are, we've made sure that that we don't have to have a relationship with one another in the future in order to resolve this. If you think about it, This is essentially what's going on with the concept of debt. It's the concept. It's part of the reason why what the use of currency is, and what you'll notice, and this is in a historical sense, is that behavior, that sort of like behavior, that back and forth where I just give to you what you need, and whatever you can provide in return is just whatever, that's cool. And, perhaps you can't even return, and then later you'll pay it back, and then so on and so on and so on, and this, perpetual balancing. That was what was practiced inside of village communities. And what was usually practiced outside of village communities was this more direct one-to-one remuneration behavior. That is to say, inside the village community, it was kind of communistic, and outside the village community, it was much more not necessarily like a market, but more like a market, insofar as that there was this equal, almost capitalistic exchange. Not capitalism, because capitalism is defined through private property ownership of the means of production, but through instead this process of us squaring our debts, right? And think about it. In the village community, you will have a relationship with them for a very long period of time. You're going to see them again. You give Joe a chair, perhaps, and, probably you give Joe a chair just because Joe needs a chair. You're his friend, you're his family, you want to see Joe have the chair he needs. But also, if indeed you do feel like you need a return, let's say you're kind of on hard times, Joe will have many opportunities to pay you back. But if you meet some random guy outside your village, and you have no idea who he is, and he has no idea who you are, and you don't know what to expect from the future of your relationship, and you in fact assume you'll probably never see this guy again, both of you want to be sure that you're square with one another. So what we see is that money and trade, in this sense, exchange for value of commodities, goes really far back, but it's mostly a demonstration of mistrust. Okay, so here's the thing. What does that say about our society? What does that say about capitalism? Well, what that says is, under capitalism, we are always trying to square every single one of these transactions because we are trying to remain radically unentangled or disentangled from the rest of society. We're trying to essentially deny the fact that we are all fundamentally intertwined with one another. We're essentially trying to make it such that every single transaction is perfectly down to the cent, exactly the thing we've agreed to, like we've developed a contract with one another, so that we can sever all ties afterwards because we have no expectation we'll ever see that person again. So remember how I said these relationships kind of go both directions? Well, this encourages a society of mistrust. It encourages a society wherein we are atomized. It encourages a society of individualism. And I should say it's not bad to have an individuality, but instead it's an ideology of radical individualism, such that we believe we act as these free actors not connected with anyone else. But recall then that, this is that cooperation is what leads to systems that act as more than the sum of their parts. So what that really means is that capitalism is anti-emergence. Capitalism is a system which prevents us creating something that is more than the sum of its parts, something that is more powerful than just, 1 + 2 + 3 humans all added together and all their efforts. What we have to do is we have to create a society wherein we increase trust, we increase direct distribution, we increase and embed more of these social relationships, and wherein those relationships become long-term. Because in long-term relationships, there's an expectation there will be a give and take, and that give and take will go on, and that therefore, we create the foundations for the possibility of a sort of communistic relation, of a sort of gift economy in that sense. Because here's the thing, It's also prefigurative in that sense. We're going to have to cultivate that mentality in ourselves. We're going to have to cultivate this sort of selflessness, this idea of giving without expectation of return, with an understanding that what we're really doing is cultivating a relationship with one another. We're cultivating, a culture of selflessness, a culture of kindness and sincerity and love for other human beings, the desire to see them flourish. That is the center of a cooperative society. At the center of a cooperative society is inherent solidarity. It is the desire to see others flourish and for us all to flourish together. So here's the thing. I want to say a word about competition. Competition can be perfectly healthy if it's in non-coerced conditions, right? For example, sports. I'm not a huge fan of sports. But sports are mostly voluntary, right? Whatever. We got these conditions where people are forced into sports by their parents, and certain cultures make it to where you basically have to, and so on. But I'm more saying that, in sports, you could simply not participate. You could participate but leave partway through. We all agree to the rules beforehand, and then we carry out this sort of consenting, competitive environment. And that leads to a much healthier form of competition, wherein what we're seeking is excellence. And it's okay to create competitive environments where we all seek excellence, so long as that is under a non-coerced condition. And the problem with capitalism is then actually that capitalism creates the default circumstances where we must compete. We don't really get another option. We don't get to choose whether we want to take place in some, economy of mutual aid or the capitalistic economy. We are forced to take place in a capitalistic economy. There's no way to escape it because it has essentially claimed all territory. And this is a historical matter that I'm not going to go into right now, and why that took place through the enclosure of the commons and so on. But what I'm really trying to emphasize here is that cooperation is not an option for left revolutionaries. We have to be eternally asking ourselves how we can expand the impulse of cooperation. Because if we don't, then we cannot create the society that is, or create the, mental, interpersonal, organizational conditions that can even lead to a different kind of society. We have to begin developing those relationships now. We have to act understanding that the behaviors that we push into the world, the way we treat other human beings, our expectations of the way that other human beings will treat us, are going to limit whatever horizons are available to us. They're going to put us in a position where we either can or cannot achieve certain things because we've either learned or not learned to inhabit those sorts of relationships, to inhabit that sort of mentality. Okay? So, as I'll be talking about in this next video, and as I talked about in strategic holism, these all intervene on one another. Okay, all these different aspects of how power is built, they all intervene. Interpersonality changes the way we think about the world, and it affects social structures and material structures we're surrounded by, and the material structures and the social structures change the way that we form interpersonal relationships and so on. But what I'm trying to get across here is that this theme of cooperation, it is woven throughout all of these. That it is this uniting factor that we're trying to orient around, which allows us to build power. We are building the counterpower to this society through the expansion of that network of cooperation. So, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go on for a long time or whether I'm, going to run out of ideas, but I think this is most of what I wanted to say. But what I would really like to emphasize is that if you want a society of cooperation, you need to embody sincerity and trustfulness and trustworthiness and kindness and acceptance and lack of judgment and, patience with other human beings in your actions. Not only because, because of what I just said about how it's like prefigurative of another world that allows us to inhabit these new ways of being, not only because it builds power for us, this is the mechanism through which our power is built, but also because it makes you a representative, an emissary for this ideology in a way which is actually consistent, which actually is going to help people understand the mentality of radical leftism. We have this tendency to be, very bitter and sardonic and insulting and judgmental. I would like to encourage you not to practice those characteristics as much as possible. Because listen, I'm not perfect. Anybody who's seen me on Twitter can know that I'm very, harsh sometimes. And, I knee-jerk react in angry ways, just like anybody else. But I know a lot of you are about to be around your family. And I'm sure your family, probably got a lot of bad opinions. A lot of you. But what I would really like to encourage you to do is practice patience. Try to talk with them like they're human beings. Demonstrate an ethos of cooperation and trust. Demonstrate to them that you are trustworthy. And in that process, you need to trust that most people are not trying to be terrible people. They think within their minds that what they're right, that they're good, that what they're doing is good. Okay? Approach people from a charitable position. Try to approach people from a charitable position. And I know some of you got some fucking relatives where that's not going to be doable. Okay? So I understand. I get it. Some of them are just going to have terrible opinions such that they are like ideological enemies, that they are carrying out a war against us. And I get that, okay? But what I want to encourage you to do is ask yourself, how are you a representative of these radical left ideologies? How can you embody cooperation, the ethos of gift giving without expectation of reciprocation, of being trustworthy, of trusting others, of creating that ethos, of developing the social fabric instead of giving in to shredding it apart? Because that is what this power structure wants. What this power structure wants is to shred the social fabric. It wants to atomize us into billions of individual pieces which it can exploit better. I want to encourage you to be trying to focus on that cooperative aspect when you approach people, not just when you go see them for Christmas, but when you approach people permanently, in a permanent sense, always. And I know, once again, it's not always going to be doable. And sometimes it's impossible to be charitable with a person. They're really, truly going to conflict with you, and that's all they want. There's nothing you can do about it, okay? But I'm asking you to give people that room to be wrong, and to guide them by the hand patiently and kindly down the path of development, and help them find the, if they're somebody you find that acts very much in self-interest, help them understand how cooperation is in their self-interest. Okay? May not be the best way for them to approach it. Remember, we're trying to create an ethic of non-reciprocality, of instead just of a giving to others without expectation of return, with this desire to build a long-term relationship. But try to meet them where they're at. Try to bring them closer to an ethos of cooperation. Try to use this spirit of Christmas, no matter how many downsides it's got. I know it's very much a consumer holiday and whatever. Try to use this spirit to help people understand this ethos of cooperation is a transformative ethos. Help them understand how competition is a tool to split them apart, and that they've been forced into competition. Wouldn't they prefer a society where solidarity and camaraderie were the watchwords of our society? And that's it. I usually go like straight 30 minutes. That's what I wanted to talk about. There's all kinds of other things I could talk about here. I'm not going to go down all those rabbit holes. That's what I wanted to say to you. With that in mind, if you have any comments or thoughts about the topic we've brought up here, go comment below. Start a conversation. I'm sure we'll get all kinds of different ideas being presented here. Keep it wholesome. Be wholesome. If you like the video, like it. If you've never subscribed to my channel before, this is a great opportunity to go subscribe. I think it's a great idea personally. And lastly, if you like the work that I'm doing on this channel, I would like to encourage you to go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch, ANARK. And any amount that you can pledge will be extremely helpful for me. I am like right on this edge where I could actually begin doing this channel full time, but I can't quite, pay the bills and buy groceries, and so on. So I keep having to find side gigs and all of that, which distracts me from the channel, and I'm ADHD, so it kind of messes with my brain really bad. All things aside, I would appreciate it if you became a patron. It would make a very large difference. And I guess that's about it. I think we're just going to stop there for today. It was good talking with you, and I'll see y'all later.